Racial beliefs work like common sense as an obvious truth that, while rooted in social structures and cultural beliefs, is nevertheless accepted simply as reality. Racial dog whistles resonate because, at the level of the taken for granted, they see the world in ways deeply colored by a foundational belief in the legitimacy of racial inequality.
Welcome back to Education in Context, where we interrogate the nuances of anti-Black thinking to reimagine schools for Black and Brown students, because we know
what we don't name, we normalize.
And in our last episode, we examined how high-stakes standardized testing acts as a political tool rather than an authentic measurement of a student's academic ability. We also learned that when that system exists, it then perpetuates inequitable outcomes for Black and Brown students because of the disparate impact it has on them. Today, we go deeper into that discussion to talk about language and how we use words to describe and internalize cultural attributes for self and others. The conversation today is grounded in our anchor text, Dog Whistle Politics by Ian Haney López. This book discusses how coded racial appeals, what López calls dog whistle politics, shapes public opinion, policy, law, and even how we see ourselves and others. So let's jump into it.
Let's do it. I'm so excited for this episode.
Just to frame our thinking, López introduces the idea that racial appeals have shifted from explicit slurs to coded language that signals race without naming it. This is what he calls dog whistle politics. On the first page of his book, in the preface, he states, "American politics today cannot be understood without recognizing racism's evolution and the power of the pernicious demagoguery."
Baby, that's a big word. Go ahead and define. Demagoguery for them.
Yeah. So for those of us that are listening, demagoguery implies manipulative political rhetoric or leadership style that appeals to emotions, prejudices, and fears rather than rational, evidence-based thinking. And so we have to take a moment to just unpack this, because we live in America, and I would say no one would describe our political system as manipulative, political, and maybe some of us would describe it as manipulative.
I also think what is interesting about this quote is where López says here, cannot be understood without recognizing racism's evolution and the power of pernicious demagoguery. And I think like this is so interesting to me, because when we think about evolution, if we're thinking about like Darwin's evolution and like what that means for like human existence, I'm like, racism, how do we think racism has evolved? And I think some people have a misconception that like this evolution describes a progress that has been made, when actually what I think López is describing here is moving from overt racism, like lynchings, like explicit racial slurs, to more covert racism, more strategic, right? More intentional.
And he talks about that in his book.
Boom. And then still sanitizing themselves from like any culpability for the violence, right?
Yeah.
And I think
like throwing a rock and hiding your hand.
Exactly. Which is why I'm like, yes, López, read that. Open the library, read them.
As I listen to you talk about like lynchings, I'm gonna go back a bit further to talk about 1619, the first year that we see enslaved people entering the North American territory from Africa, and the ways in which that language that was used to describe those enslaved people was manipulative. There was a political interest to subject us to an experience for the purpose of profiting. And so that language that started with us as enslaved people, describing us, also the ways in which they had to justify the enslavement. And so, we were seen as subhuman, and we were seen as, you said in the last episode, chattel. And so how does that play out in the language that we now use,
I also think what is so interesting, and you named this like when we were having the pre-episode conversation about how Lopez is intentional with referring to history
Yes.
throughout this text, and like why that's so powerful, because I think some people would have the misconception that the covert racism only happened over time, but I would make the argument that like people were using words as weapon very early.
Yes.
And when we think about the language of like boy, right, and like the way in which just the uttering of that word to a enslaved black man or a free black man during that time was with the intent to dehumanize, and that is seemingly a racially neutral word, boy. Right? But in the context of those instances, it was meant to make you feel less than. Right? And to emasculate the black man in those instances, right? And so I think about how that then evolves to thug.
Oh, yeah. Thug.
How that then evolves to insert seemingly
or ghetto.
Exactly.
Or
seemingly racially neutral words that are now used. Or think about like welfare queens, right? Like, and the misconception we have around the black woman being a welfare queen when we see statistics say white women actually are the highest demographic on welfare. So it's very interesting how the welfare queen can be a concept that is racially charged when that's the data says otherwise, right? And I think we see very early on words being used as weapons. Think about black codes, right? And the ways that like black people...
I was just thinking about that.
We couldn't even be in a group with each other. It was illegal.
You brought up this... and it sounds silly saying it now in 2026, but
we still can't be.
Yeah, exactly. You bring up this thought. You said the word boy, and I recently have been in contact with an individual that I just met, and they, in describing me, has said boy a couple of times, and and this is a black individual. I don't think that they are aware of the historical context in which that word is being used. I also think, playing devil's advocate, there's nothing wrong with the word boy. There is, because of the historical context, I am very hyper aware of the way in which I am being called boy, just in terms of saying hello or responding. And so when I think about language, I think about how we have to educate ourselves and be just aware of how we perceive certain words that we think aren't problematic, or phrases that aren't problematic that actually are problematic.
I'm definitely going to add her because I'm about to give her flowers, but Alexis Pauline Gumbs, very dope. You need to read her dissertation if you have not. When I was doing debate in college, I used her dissertation as like the foundational framework for my arguments, because something that she said in there, one, we're both poets, like we know the power of words. And she says in her piece, because she pays homage to a lot of black feminist poets like Audre Lorde, right? Like Barbara Smith. And she says in her dissertation, words are bodily, they live and breathe. And I think that is so real in the context of, one, Lopez's book, but the way in which we exist, and how, to your point, I say all the time, what's up, my boy? To like my homies. You know what I'm saying? And in that context, it is a term of endearment, right? In the same way in which boy can then be used from a white police officer to a black man telling him, get your wallet out, for pulling him over for like his rear light not being functioning. And that be a whole different context with a whole different meaning and rooted in so many other different things. And I think
which is why context matters so much, so much.
And people's awareness, which we talked about pre-episode, like awareness of the ways in which you don't actually get to call me that.
Exactly. You don't.
You don't actually get to say that, my guy. You don't. You don't actually get to do it.
One of the things that I want to lift right now is this phrase, pernicious demagoguery. Pernicious implies destructive. And we just define demagoguery as manipulative political rhetoric. I think people would say in some parts of our society, yes, we do see a destructive use of language and trying to manipulate people's opinions about, whatever their political beliefs might be. But I also think that I don't know that we would, as a society, describe our country, as a whole as this thing. But I think Lopez is getting at, no, our American politics is pernicious. It is inherently destructive. It's self-imploding. And if we don't start to understand, the way dog whistle politics work within our country and how we perpetuate or state those dog whistles in our language, then we become a part of, this cog of a system that we don't see because we lack awareness, or maybe we don't lack awareness. We're fully aware, which he gets at strategic racism.
Boom.
We're fully aware of the ways in which, race operates, as a form of oppression, particularly against Black and brown people, and we do it because it benefits
and
someone.
I think, like, how does this now relate to, like, the work that we do in education? It directly relates, because education is such a political space that if we are not, to your point, aware of the ways in which our words can be weaponized, then we then project those same ideologies onto our students. We then invoke it in policy that is in our schools. And you said something today, like, about how, like, I don't know that some people would identify American politics in this way. And it's like, actually, we're in a current political climate where people actually might.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, the way in which rhetoric about immigrants right now, like the ways in which we frame national security as what we are trying to protect to then criminalize non-white bodies, right? And like what that means. And so I think when we think about that, it is directly relevant to the work that we do with our students, because when we talk about equipping our educators with the awareness to know, if you look like our kids, you should be equipping our kids with the skill set to navigate the world and political context that we're in. If you don't look like your kids, you need to be aware so that you can also equip them, but also unlearn and not perpetuate the same things in which we are seeing. And if you are aware, please don't work with our kids. I'm just gonna be honest. If you are aware and doing it, please just don't.
And I think that is the uncomfortable truth that people have to really grapple with, because at the end of the day, like, you are traumatizing, Black and brown children if you are aware of the ways in which you perpetuate dog whistle politics and you continue to do it, especially if you're doing it because it benefits you in some way, which Lopez gets at. As we think about the next quote that's going to ground our conversation, Lopez argues that dog whistle rhetoric reflects how we are racially socialized in media politics within the laws that exist in the United States and schools. And so on page 181 of our text, Lopez tells us 4 different forces impel us to think in racist terms: social learning, the environment, cognitive routines, and motives. And so if we know humans are socialized into understanding concepts of race, how might classroom culture, curriculum, pedagogy, disciplinary practices, and everyday dialogue reinforce racialized assumptions?
Well,
a big thing to unpack.
It's a trigger
right now.
for me. It's a trigger.
Yeah.
Because I need us to live in the data. I need us to live in what the data says, because the data tells a story. And we talked about this in a previous episode, how, like, I did not go to schools with students that predominantly look like me. And it still was people that predominantly look like me in all the remedial classes. It still was people that look like me in school suspension. It's still people that look like me in being expelled, right? Like, and so it shows that there's actually something in the fabric of how we are socialized that then permeates institutions, whether you go to a school in the suburbs or you go to a school on the west side of Chicago. Something is in the fabric of how we understand who is a normal, compliant body and who is not, who diverges from that, and how we respond when they diverge from that, which is then why we can see our Black boys being pushed out of schools, our Black girls being pushed out of schools. And the argument to me is, like, really interesting because, for example, at the school that I'm at, like, our Black girls actually are the highest performing academically at the school that I work at currently, which says a lot to me because our Black girls are also still over-policed.
Yes.
and criminalized.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so it's like, wow.
And they are seen as more aggressive and, prone to violence. Like that's a thing that I have heard specifically as being associated with a Black girl.
Which is insane because the argument for Black boys being pushed out is like, oh, the system failed them. So they're not academically equipped. That's why And it's like the system failed Black girls.
Yep.
And they are also pushed out and criminalized and all these things. So what is the excuse there? Like, how are we rationalizing the ways in which our Black students are not having an equitable experience in schools regardless of the zip code that they are in?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that is a problem for me when we think about this concept, is that people are unwilling to interrogate the ways they've been socialized to determine who fits and who does not fit.
I'm also thinking about my upbringing because I don't know that I had an awareness about the ways in which racial politics plays out. Like I don't think I had an awareness about how I was perceived as a Black male growing up because I grew up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I've told you this. And I grew up in a very religious household. So like, my life, my actions every day, knocking on doors, wanting to talk to people about the Bible and, share scripture, that was my life. And so I didn't have a concept of like race being a thing that was impacting me or my family or my community. And so, and I'm thinking about the quote that we just looked at, how we are impelled to think in racist ways. Part of that for me, I think, was the way I was socialized, how I learned to be social in that religious setting where race was not a part of that conversation. And to my not maybe not detriment, but because I didn't have the opportunity to learn about that early on, I think that's why I'm so invigorated now as an adult that is in a doctoral program doing this research, because I want to learn more. I want to understand how I've been impacted, and I wasn't aware of it. It wasn't a thing for me until I got to college, and I started taking classes that kind of exposed me to other types of material.
It's so interesting for me because I'm like, I actually grew up in a household that was very anti-Black American just because both of my parents were Caribbean immigrants. And I have always from a young age had like such a strong sense of justice. Like I remember like my parents had no understanding of like racism in America because they weren't taught it. Like they came here in their adult lives. Classism was mostly something that they experienced in Jamaica. And so for me, being in schools where predominantly people didn't look like me and me telling my mom, like, these administrators are racist. And like her being like, you're going to school, you don't just go to school, just focus on school. And her not being able to advocate for me, I feel like even mobilized me more. Because I'm like, all right, I need to be equipped.
Yes.
Because my mom is actually able to advocate for me in the ways I need her to.
Yeah.
Because she had no semblance of consciousness yet. And it wasn't like an intentionally malicious thing. She just didn't know. She wasn't aware. Yeah. She later started to have experiences that made her more aware because she would have patients that would say to her, like, I don't want you to help me. Like, I don't want a Black nurse to help me. Like, and then she was like, oh, wow, like this is the thing in America, right? But when I was a student at school, like I remember this really, I would say radicalized me because
That's beautiful.
When I went to high school,
that's beautiful.
I remember my counselor, that's the person that's supposed to put me in my classes or whatever, she put me in remedial classes. And off of the strength of I was a Black girl, like she did not look at my test scores, nothing, put me in remedial classes. I think I told you this. Yeah. At my first day in the class, the teacher was like, I did the do now, like the first little assignment. Yeah. And the teacher was like, you're not supposed to be in here. Like, this is brilliant. Like, you need to be in AP. Like, what is this? And I remember telling my mom, because the one thing about my mom, like, she was very anti-Black in the concept of, like, her relationship to other, like, Black Americans. Yeah. But Jamaicans are very prideful people. So, like, for her, it felt like a dig. It felt like a dig. Like, you put my child in a remedial class. And that made her mad. You know what I'm saying? But for me, I'm like, hey, remember when he said that this wasn't a thing? Now let's look at this. And I think that for me was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Y'all will literally go as far as preventing Black students from having access to the things they deserve access to because they have the brilliance to do it off the strength of your racist.
Yeah.
That's it.
And you're already operating off of the stereotypes, the dog whistles that you also spew to inform why you're making this decision to, keep these Black children, i.e. you in this instance, in this remedial space.
Boom. And it's also like shows the illogical nature of racism because it's like ever since I was in kindergarten, I was performing above average, all my test scores, etc. I've always been like on track to literally at one point in my elementary career, they wanted to have me skip a grade, which means you did not look at my data at all.
Yeah.
You just said, Black student, remedial,
but
which
that's
is insane.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I'm thinking about in this conversation is how we were viewed during the slavery era. So think about we're viewed as childish, we're not viewed as human, we're viewed as someone that needs a paternal figure or guardian and Lopez talks about this, or master or owner, and we were joyfully enslaved. It was something that we took pride in. It was something that we needed because God said you need to Christianize these savages, as is described in historical literature that talks about the ways in which language was used to describe us. And interestingly, post-emancipation era, now we have we're not joyfully enslaved. We're now a threat to the community. We are vengeful. We are lust-filled. There's this other narrative that is now swinging in a particular direction because of when the 13th Amendment was enacted. One of the things that, and I have the language here, is one of the things that it states in the 13th Amendment, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime. And so, yes, slavery is abolished, but now we have people that have a loophole. Now we're going to catch you doing something that is against the law.
Now we're going to criminalize being Black.
Yes, we're going to put you in prison, and you're going to be leased as a convict to person that owns a plantation. And so slavery continues. And so, I think language for, at least as it relates to Black people and Black culture, is always shifting to benefit the dominant narrative or the dominant group, which we know to be white and whiteness. I think about our environment because our environment is also propagating this narrative about us. So
absolutely. And I think that the way that this bridges to the classroom is we actually are the people that have to equip our students, specifically Black and brown students, to either interrupt or reproduce. Like that is where we're positioned to do. And that, like, my kid, I always tell my students that all the time in class, like, if you cannot read, you are setting yourself up to be a follower because you do not know what is actually being put in front of you. So you're going to have to blindly trust someone that you do not know has your best interest, which is why as educators, as Black administrators, it is our responsibility. We have a responsibility to equipping our students with access to reading and writing, because people that have access to reading and writing right now are writing narratives that are rationalizing the violence that's happening to you, right? And this is a prime instance of that. If we write in the law this loophole and Black people can't read,
they have no way of advocating for themselves, standing up saying, nope, this is not right. We need to. And we know we have Black intellectuals in that time period that was doing that work, but we also know that when the masses cannot read or write, that's problematic. That's problematic.
Yep. And it's so interesting because one of my homegirls, she posted on her story for Black History Month the first day and was like, this month, please read nonfiction Black text. And I'm just like, people don't realize how much like that is a site of resistance to be able to read and to read nonfiction texts about what has happened in the world, what is happening in the world, to mobilize you to do something in the world. And not to say that we have this like liberal understanding of progress and change, but to say if you are not equipped, you are not able to advocate for yourself or anyone else. Because listen, I'm quick to be like, oh, hey, love that we had this conversation. Can you go ahead and follow up an email, put this in writing? Because I will refer to it. And I don't care. Like, I will respond to you in email because I'm going to be able to, you have to be able to do that. And I think not enough of us are able to do that. And that's why we are then manipulated.
Whistle politics, manipulated into situations where we are either being taken advantage of, we are being coerced through that manipulation and doing things that actually are harmful to us or harmful to the students or the staff members that we work with. And, there is the guise of, oh, this is all in the best interest of children, or rigor, whatever you want, whatever the excuse is, when it's just like, nope, this is just harmful.
Boom.
This is just pernicious.
And I'm good to be like, hey, no, this is illegal.
This is just pernicious.
This is illegal. And
demagoguery.
Listen, and maybe people
is.
love to be like, they have to be on their toes. Yes, you need to be on your toes with me as it relates to these kids. Like, I don't play that.
Because I'm on your neck about how you're showing up with them.
On your neck. Because it's somebody else's kids, not mine. Like, I really think that people need to recognize that, like, it is okay to be a disruptor.
It is.
It is okay to be a disruptor as it relates to the students that we serve. Because, unfortunately, politics as usual is dog whistle politics.
Yes.
Politics as usual is dog whistle politics. So if you're standing for politics as usual, just to clock in, clock out, and you're in the work of urban education, we are not aligned.
Yeah, one of the things López says in his book is how some people perpetuate the dog whistle politics because it is beneficial for them. It's a thing that, protects their image or protects their association from a thing that that is inherently anti-Black, but that they can't explicitly name because maybe they're a white principal at a Black school. And it's just like, okay, so you can't do that. You actually cannot center yourself. It's not about you. It's actually always about the Black and brown children that we serve. And if that is how you are moving for the sake of your image or, whatever title you hold, then as you've said multiple times before this episode, this is not the work for you. You can work at a school teaching kids that look like you.
And honestly, you can't. Just don't do education because what's going to happen is you're going to perpetuate that in those spaces, and then you're going to raise
Thank you
children.
for that push. Yeah,
then you're going to raise and teach children to show up like you who don't look like our kids, and then they become policymakers and invoking this in laws and I think people need to understand that we all have a responsibility to interrupt our decision-making calculuses that are rooted in the ways in which we are socialized. If we are not interrupting it, we are perpetuating. It is a binary. You are either interrupting or you're perpetuating. There is no in between.
López, he brings up categorizations, autonomy, loss aversion. When I think about categorizations, I think about how we are always trying to label people, places, things. We're always trying, it's so that we can make meaning of it. But how the way in which we categorize things within itself can be racist because, once again, we've been socialized through our environment and through our upbringing, social upbringing, to associate certain ideas. I also think about this idea of autonomy, like how our brain will automatically, if we're not aware of a particular thing that may or may not lend itself towards racism, our brain still tries to put it in a category, But all of that, we have to have the skill set of interrogating in that moment. Okay, I'm associating a Black person or Black culture with this idea or this thing. Where is this coming from? Is this true? If it's not true, why am I saying it? Why was it said to me? And then just really getting at the thought of is this dog whistle? Is this racially coded appeals, or is this rooted in fact and truth?
And I think about just the concept of non-binary, right? As a concept, it is to repel this idea of definition. And I think that we want to constantly define things because it is a very ego-centered way of existing. Like, if I can define it, I have control over this, which is why, like, Audre Lorde, this quote's literally in my bathroom on my wall. Like, if I did not define myself for myself, I would be crushed into other people's fantasies for me, right? And eaten alive. And like, that's just a real
so
thing.
Deep. That's
like
deep.
a real thing.
That is a real thing.
Is like, this is why it's important for specifically Black and brown children to be literate, because then they can define themselves.
Yeah.
They don't have to succumb to the world's definitions of them. They can define themselves and navigate this world in a way that is rooted in their own definition of themselves. And I think that when we are not equipped with enough language or a complex enough lexicon, we don't have the skill set to define ourselves. So then we just succumb to whatever society says you are. That's who you are now. And it's like, no. Who are you? Who show up as who you are? And like, and I think that that's the pieces, to your point, is not only about comfortability, but a lot of people that benefit from dog whistle politics are also afraid of who then they are if they had to interrogate the ways in which they were complicit in the violence. So if I just ignore it, then I don't have to confront the ways in which I've been complicit in it.
Yeah, Lopez gets at this idea of colorblindness. And this idea of colorblindness.
I hate a colorblind queen. Like, come on. Hate a colorblind queen. Hate a colorblind queen.
Our quote is on page 45 of this text that is grounded in our conversation from Lopez states, "It's not race our minds naturally seek out, but difference generally. Because race infiltrates our minds so thoroughly, even persons deeply and genuinely committed to humane engagement with others often, nevertheless, draw upon pernicious racial stereotypes." And so I think we have to understand that, you know, we are drawn towards and appreciate and embrace like the difference of people, of things, of life. You know, we have all kinds of colors and outfits and you know, difference is great, but it's interesting how, you know, then when we think about race lends itself to, because of the way in which we naturally think about differences and attach meaning to it and look for it and look forward to it, how it allows us then to engage in this very real pernicious racially charged stereotypes that we perpetuate. Like,
absolutely. And I think I shared this like analogy with you before of like an intent versus impact. And you know, if there's an apple on someone's head and I'm trying to focus on the apple, I'm trying to shoot the apple and I miss and I hit them and they die. Doesn't matter that I was trying to shoot the apple now. No, it doesn't. Right? And I think that the piece about it is like people feel so personally attacked when they are held accountable to things that have racial implications, when it's like, I'm not sitting here saying you're this horrible person that you were trying to harm me. I am saying the impact of what you did was harmful.
It's harmful.
Boom. And this is a critique of that. It is not a critique of anything else. And if your intentions were to harm me, you should feel bad.
And it's also an opportunity for us to grow. I think like when it's kind of like, you know, when you're in a situation, you're not always aware of how you operate, how you are perceived, you know, how your thoughts come across. But then when someone can reflect that back to you, like, hey, you said this thing was harmful because of this reason. And this is an example of, you know, you potentially being prejudiced or your bias coming out. Like, I think saying that, or someone hearing that, should be a freeing thing, because it's okay. It's okay as long as you have the awareness and then are responding by choosing something different, choosing a different word, choosing not to say that word or that phrase that, you know, is rooted in racism. And so I think that's a real thing.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is like sometimes people feel like there's just so much new language, like this is so laborious. And it's like, y'all, it is okay to have to pause and think about what you about to say before you say it. It is okay.
You should do that.
Boom. Like, you should actually take a second because of how deeply flawed we are as humans.
Yes.
We actually do need to pause and think about what we about to say before we say it. Like, we actually do need to reflect and interrupt
Yeah.
our thinking before we interact,
Yeah.
etc. You do need to do
Yeah,
that
yeah.
because of the ways in which words are bodily and they live and breathe.
Yes.
Like,
And going back to the previous thought that our language is embedded within us having our ancestors having that lived experience of being enslaved. And so all of the language that we, use to describe Black people and Black culture, some of it is appropriate because it's Black culture that was brought from Africa to inform what would then become American culture. But then we also have like this idea of like we have so much other language within our experience that was presented to us by our colonizer, that lends itself towards, it's just racist. And so we can't exist without like having that context so that when someone challenges us about something that we say or do, we're not offended. This is an opportunity to grow and we welcome it because we want to be better.
Boom. And it's so interesting because I literally been watching this series on Netflix that I love. And in the series, one of the last episodes, the prosecutor is like trying to convict this man who's innocent and didn't do the thing. And then when the prosecutor finds out that they didn't do the thing, the prosecutor is more upset that they were not able to prosecute than the fact that you were going to wrongfully prosecute someone. And it makes me think about the ways in which like I don't think oftentimes people care enough about the impact. And that's actually why I am okay with you being uncomfortable because I don't know that you would have cared that this was the impact on this person.
Yeah.
And I think specifically in America, we're such an individualistic country and like we prioritize individualism in a way that's just to our detriment that people are like, it's not really impacting me. So.
Yeah. And it happens a lot. And it happens a lot on both sides.
Yeah.
Black and brown people, can be very complacent with things as they are. And it's like, no, the things that are happening right now keep generations of Black and brown people in poverty, keep generations of Black and brown people in and out of the prison system. And I don't know, there's a conversation to be had about how we collectively think about, how do our children, our future, how do we equip them with the mindset to care? Because I would argue some of the Black and brown children that are coming up also don't care. And it's not because they don't want to care, but it's just they just haven't been educated in that way because education does not lend itself to, equip a Black and brown student with that knowledge because it doesn't benefit. It doesn't benefit to our conversation last week in episode 2, like it doesn't benefit capitalism. It doesn't benefit our economy. And so, our Black suffering is profitable.
I also think like I was just gonna reference that because I was just gonna say I also think there's a misconception about like the lack of motivation from our students or the lack of caring for our students in the current education system because I think it's like there's also a fatigue that comes with this work.
Yeah.
Like there's also a fatigue about like, I know specifically for me, like I have always been like a disruptor and how I show up in the world. And it is exhausting.
It is
exhausting. Like whatever Baldwin said about like to be conscious in Black in America is to be in a constant state of rage. Like rage is exhausting. It is exhausting to be in these spaces and hear things and be like, why would you ever open your mouth and say that?
Yeah.
Like that is exhausting to be aware of that because when you're not aware of that, that thing is less exhausting for you because you didn't even know. It didn't even hit your brain and be like, wow, this is violent.
Yes.
But it hit my brain and I'm like, wow, this is violent.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I think this generation of students that we're serving right now probably also have like an ontological exhaustion. Like they are feeling exhausted because
they're going through the experience. They might not be able to name it in words. They might not be able to explain it.
To put language to it.
But you're having an experience that does not feel safe, does not feel like you are valued, does not feel like you belong, does not feel like you belong in a classroom where learning is happening at a high level and you are being supported to execute at that high level because we care about you learning how to read and learning how to write and do basic math.
And a sense of nihilism. Like,
Yeah.
there's like, and I think people like to often victim blame and say like, oh, they just don't care about. There's a sense of not being hopeful about society because of what they are constantly seeing,
Yeah.
images they are bombarded by, etc. Like, there is a justifiable
Yeah.
amount of nihilism because of the ways in which the world is not reflecting progress. The world is not reflecting
It's not
liberation. Like, you know what I'm saying? So
not.
given that, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand your cynicism. You know, like I understand you not being hopeful about our current political state.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective as I am thinking about what you just said. The next part of our conversation, López argues that dog whistles succeed when they go unnamed, so we must be acutely aware of our unconscious social judgments. And so page 78.
What we said about anything you don't name?
You normalize. You normalize. Yep. So on page 78 of our novel, López writes, something that does help us navigate the dangerous shoals of race, talking openly about racial differences and what they might mean. Cognitive biases and social judgment can be controlled only through subsequent deliberate mental correction that takes group status squarely into account. And when I think about this, I'm thinking about the question, like, how do we engage in conversations about race in ways that are honest, developmentally appropriate? Because, you know, we are dealing with a younger population in some instances and an older population in other instances, if you're in the high school setting. And how do we talk about this in a way that is affirming Black and brown students? One thing that I'm thinking about right now is this idea that we have to normalize curiosity about someone's culture if we don't understand the culture or vocabulary in the culture, ways of showing up within that culture or in certain cultural settings. And we also need to be okay with correcting people. We have to be okay with correcting people. We have to also be okay with the uncomfortableness that might be a part of being corrected. I
like this too about like rejecting the colorblind narrative. And I think that like people often conflate, like maybe they're throwing around DEI like it's popcorn. Everybody want to say DEI, and it's just so triggering for me because I'm like, man, you don't spell equity because at this point you don't know what it is. And I think that there is a misconception that equity is sameness. And I love this piece about equity is responsiveness. And I don't know where I saw this, so I'm not giving credit to whoever. I don't remember, but there's like this picture to show equity, and there's like different stool sizes or ladder sizes or something. And it's showing like how there's a different ladder needed based on the height of the person to see over the fence.
Based on the context.
And I was like, that's equity. Right? Like, you cannot say, let me give every single student $10 and that's us being equitable. No, not if one person came in with negative $50. Not if one person came in with negative $100. Not if when one person came in with $100, now you get them $10. It's not equal. It's not equal because it assumes a equal starting point. And I think that's the misconception. When we're thinking about leadership team meetings, grade team meetings, classroom settings, all of these instances in education when we are having conversations about like equitable airtime or equitable resources, we need to ask ourselves, what is the starting point of the people in these spaces? Whose voices actually need to be centered in this conversation? And I think this lends itself to what we said in previous episodes about why mindset work is so important. Because when people are not forced to interrogate this colorblind narrative, then they constantly fall into this misunderstanding of what equity is. Because they've never been asked to be like, what privilege am I bringing into this space? What am I coming into this space with that my peers don't have? Where do I actually need to be quiet and step back because my voice is not the center of the conversation right now?
Yeah.
And I don't think that work is being done intentionally, which then leads to...
I don't think it is.
Yeah, which then leads to dog whistle politics being
Yeah.
perpetuated.
Yeah.
Which leads to all of the violences, anti-Black violence.
Yep.
Because we're not doing that work
Yeah.
to interrogate our own thinking.
Yeah, and I've recently had a powerful experience where I was working at a different school last year, and the deans that I was working with, I was in a meeting with them, and I was frustrated with a particular individual that I managed, and in my frustration used a term that I heard in describing this individual, used a term that I heard my grandfather use often when I was growing up. And it was something that I didn't think twice about saying because it's a term that I would normally use in this particular context when I'm frustrated, because I associate this term with someone not doing their job or being lazy. And the dean, both of the deans, or I was with like 3 or 4 deans, one of the deans had texted me and was like, hey, you said you used this word, and do you know what this word means? And I was like, well, this is what a word that I use to describe someone who's lazy. And she's like, oh, actually, this word means this. And it was a offensive word about a particular group of people. And I was unaware of it because, once again, me growing up, hearing that word in my family unit, I was used to using that word. And so to have that experience, first of all, was powerful because it brought me even closer to them. You know, obviously, you know, I owned my harm. I apologize. But I think the bigger piece there was that we built a deeper level of trust in our relationship in that moment, because they were able to be courageous in saying the thing to me. And I was vulnerable enough to receive it, to take the feedback, and then to, while acknowledging the harm, make the adjustment. And I think that is at the center of how we need to move with the people that we work with, the staff members, the teachers, administrators, especially administrators, because they have a wider influence within the school setting. And I appreciate that experience. And, you know, my thought to anyone that is in education, like, those experiences are the experiences that is going to move the needle forward in how we need to disrupt dog whistle politics. So.
Absolutely. And I think that you said this on a previous episode around leaning into discomfort, leaning into fear and discomfort is very important in this work. If anything is going to shift,
yes.
I'll use the language shift as opposed to progress, because in reality, when we are not interrupting, we are not receptive to the mental correction that Lopez describes, we are then perpetuating.
Yeah.
And it matters that we can name the things, but we can also receive it when it's named and shift our practice.
And you have to take your ego out of it. I think that's the thing that I did. I mean, I do it whenever. I have no problem taking feedback from. I have no problem with getting any push. But I think, to be corrected on something like that, and also like I felt really bad because it's just like, man, like I, don't ascribe, the ideas that this word means to any of you all, but we say intent versus impact, and the impact is the same regardless of what you meant to say or how you meant to say it. And so I just think it's really important that, we continue to be uncomfortable. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay to feel nervous, scared. It's okay to cry. Like if you're that, emotional
sometimes,
about. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes. Look, well,
sometimes don't
context matters. Context matters. But I'm really appreciative of like those types of educators that like I care so much about us being better with each other that I'm always going to say the thing in love with respect, but I'm going to say it to you.
Boom. And I think that that's something me and like my co-assistant principal from last year that what I always say is like, for me, accountability is love. Like I hold people accountable because I care about you being better. If I didn't believe you could be better, I wouldn't hold you accountable. And at the end of the day, like I think that's people need to reframe how they view accountability, because we often view it as like, this is an attack on my inner being of who I am. And like, they're saying I'm this horrible person. It's like, no, but I am saying this action was not good.
Yep.
It had a negative impact. So let's talk about it, unlearn. And I love here of just like learning a more appropriate way to describe or language something and not repeating that thought again at all. Right. And this piece of, if we know historically, specifically Black and brown people, specifically Black people, were barred from reading and writing, there's going to be a lot of misinformation that is passed down generationally. And so we actually have to be more courageous, especially with each other, with one, saying the thing, but two, being open to the thing being said to us, so that we can show up better for people that we claim to care about. And so that's the biggest piece.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% aligned to that. So the three things that just highlighting here when we think about how we engage in conversations about race, you brought up the third thing. The first thing is clarity and what is being interrupted and why the dog whistle is problematic. So being very clear in your feedback, like, hey,
that's a no.
This thing you said is not appropriate. This is the reason why. This is the racial undertones that this idea has. And then two, repairing by way of acknowledgement. That might mean sometimes apologizing depending on the impact that your language had on the individuals that heard it. And then also, to your point, then learning that new way to say a thing, or don't say the thing at all because it's offensive. Point blank, period.
I also think, too, something that I'm thinking about is like there have been instances where people were held accountable to the things that they said or did, that then they came to me and they were like, but like a lot of people just said that they weren't really that like affected by it. And it made me realize that people are so unaware of the ways in which dog whistle politics is politics as usual. Because for you to fix your mouth to say that to me means you don't actually understand how much misinformation permeates society.
Exactly.
That, they might have not been offended because they were not actually aware of the impact.
Yeah.
And that does not change the fact that this is problematic.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that that's the piece, is like, people also need to operate, especially in spaces like education that are so inherently political. I also believe that political is personal and every space is political, but here we are. But I think in education, when we have like very political positions as administrator, et cetera, it doesn't actually matter if your staff is hyper aware of this thing being a negative thing.
Yeah. It matters.
Once you become aware of it, you have a responsibility to repair.
Yep.
I don't care.
Yep. And that's it. That's the piece. That's the piece. So on page 226 and page 227 of our anchor text, López writes, "The rest of us consciously consider race, raise one's voice. We have to be smarter about whom we support." And when I think about this, I often think about, how do we collectively move, particularly as a Black and brown community, in terms of that disruption? The question that we have, what is one belief, policy, or common practice, as we think about this quote, in education that we need to interrogate more closely and through a racial lens? I
think that, I don't know that this is a specific belief or policy, but I think that we have to move. I'm pretty sure I probably said this in a previous episode, but I don't know. But we need to move from, I be believing what I believe, but
everything is connected.
Yes.
That's the thing about this conversation. Everything is connected.
Yeah, and what I was gonna say is, I think as it relates to how behavior is treated in education, I think we need to move from a framework that students are problems to fix to a framework that they are people to support. And like, that is the shift.
That's revolutionary.
If we made that shift in educational spaces, we would be transformatively different.
Yeah.
And I think because 100%. We are constantly operating in the former framework, that children are problems to fix, these are problems to fix, these are things to as opposed to people to support, we would have a more human-centered framework in how we approach leading schools, leading classrooms, leading grade teams, because we would recognize that these are people to support. So what does it look like for me to support?
Yeah.
And sometimes support is, hey, teaching is not the field for you.
Yeah.
So let's find you a field that is for you.
Yeah.
This, I can see you're not invested. And one of my teachers I actually manage right now, I remember saying to him, like, hey, I see you're not invested. And he was like, what do you mean? Like, I am invested. I'm like, you're not. And like, here's the evidence as to why I see you're not invested.
Yeah.
However, I don't think you're not invested in the kids. I think you're not invested in the way in which you are being asked to teach these kids, or what you are being asked to teach these kids, which means you are not actually giving your full brilliance to this work.
Yeah.
And that was transformative for him, because he was like, I see that when I'm right, like, you have my back 100 grand. I see when I'm wrong, like, you're going to hold me accountable. And I was like, yes, because I see the things that you value and don't value. And I don't want the narrative to be you just don't care about this work, because I don't think that's true. You care about these kids. I see that in your interactions with them. How, like, I see you care about these kids. I see you are not invested in the way in which you have been asked to show up and support them, which is why your performance looks how it looks, right? And I think if we saw the adults we served building the belief, if we had belief in the adults we served, to see them as people to support, they would then see our children as people to support and not problems to fix. And, you know, I think that shift, that paradigmatic shift, would be integral in disrupting educational spaces.
I 100% agree with you. I'm constantly thinking about, how do I keep the children in the classroom? Because, you know, I get it, children will be children and they will push the boundaries, but like, there's some things, even recently at my school, where teachers are requesting students be removed, and I'm just like, I'm not removing this student for this reason. You need to phase one, manage your classroom. You need to, you know, deliver the outcome of the consequence. You use the tools available to you. Hold them accountable with their grade. You know, if applicable, call their parent. Go through this cycle of supporting that student before you call me to remove
And
them.
I want to push you, because I think that tells me they don't have the skill set to do it. And so as administrators, how are we being like, what does support look like for this teacher? Right? And maybe support looks like you're on a PIP. Like, maybe that's what it looks like.
Maybe that's what it looks like.
You're on a PIP, and like, I am giving more intensive to support to identify if this is a role that you could be in or not. Like, and I think that that's the piece, is like, I've noticed, like, mostly since being at like schools in Chicago, this narrative around like, man, this teacher sucks, or like, man, this teacher, whatever. And I'm like, this is rhetoric used amongst administrators. And I'm thinking to myself, like, who do y'all think is responsible for developing this teacher, especially in charter? Like, you know, I know in public school systems, there's a different structure where like they probably are going into that classroom one time for the entire year. But in charter, like, we preach that we care about development. We preach that we are coaching our teachers.
We do.
So who do you think is responsible for making this person better or performance managing them out?
I think there's probably a general idea. Obviously, you're an administrator and you coach you coach teachers that you're responsible for their development. But I think there comes a point in the development where either one or two things happen as an administrator. Either you say, this teacher's not doing well, and it's because of them, and you go through whatever the motions to coach them out. Or you say, this teacher's not doing well because I have not done my due diligence in not only interrogating where the gap is in how they're teaching, but also putting the right system in place to help them develop their skill set. I also think, when I think about the previous comment that I made, I particularly had in mind 3 teachers that I think have mindset gaps. And so for me, it's like, if you have a mindset gap, this probably isn't the job for you. I can coach a skill gap. I will always be able to coach a skill gap and support that teacher. But if you have a mindset gap, a will gap, a belief gap about what you think, the Black and brown children can do in this space, then as we have said multiple times, this is not the job for you.
Boom. And I think the other
This is
piece
not
is
the
like
job for you.
principals have a responsibility to identifying the same thing in their instructional coaches.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And if you know, hey, my teachers are not getting better, what does it look like for me to develop my instructional coaches, my administrators, to be better, to coach my teachers?
Yeah.
Or is it they believe what they believe about our teachers and don't want to actually coach them?
Yeah.
Maybe they need to be performance managed out, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think
sometimes the principal needs to be performance managed out. Sometimes the principal is struggling to
I ain't gonna say it.
develop.
But anything we don't name, we normalize.
Anything we don't name, we normalize. We gonna keep it going. Yeah, no, that's a real thing. It's just
but I think that's the piece too, right? Like, I think that we do not enough think about things through the lens of what support does this person need? And we more so think of this as like, this person is a problem I need to push out.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that is rooted in like maybe the people's own belief in their ability to coach people up. Like you just want all perfect teachers. Newsflash, post-COVID, the pool is very shallow. The pool is shallow.
And newsflash, pre-COVID, you still need to develop teachers, whether you think they're highly effective or
Olympians
don't think they're highly effective.
Olympians have coaches. So period.
Even that needs to continue to be a push. Like we're developing all the teachers. I don't care if you think they're an expert or they're a novice.
But I think the reason why I brought this up is because I think when we're thinking about what you said around mindset, I told you this before the episode of like, the realest thing that was said to me recently is like, we can't change mindsets, we can change actions, then that changes mindsets. So if I know I am specifically coaching you up on actions, modeling the thing, and you're not getting better, that's I've said to teachers like, hey, do you want to be here? Like, do you want to be here?
Yeah.
Why are you asking me that? Because these actions are showing me you don't want to be here.
You not having your lesson internalized, you showing up to work late, you calling off at the last minute over multiple weeks.
Do you want to be here?
You removing students every other day, the same student every other day.
Do you want to be here? And that's like, it's okay if you don't, but please, I said this too. Children should not be suffering for adult gaps.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, if you don't want to be here, please choose a desk job.
Yeah.
Like, please choose a job that is not, I'm serious. Like, please choose a job that does not impact my babies because I love these kids, right? Yeah. And I think that's the piece is leaders need to be more courageous to be like, do you want to be here?
Yeah.
Because these actions are saying, I've said to teachers like, hey, every time you're not holding these students accountable to what you said the expectation was, you are communicating that you don't believe they can meet the expectation. Yep. And I think that's very problematic that you as a white man are not holding our kids accountable because that tells me you don't believe they can meet the expectation. Yeah. And then they'll be like, no, I don't believe that at all. Okay, cool.
Hold them accountable.
But your actions are saying this.
Yes.
Like, and then I'll be like, hey, I believe that you believe in our kids.
Yeah.
But your actions are saying this.
Yep.
And then that way it shifts for them like, all right, what do I need to shift in my actions to communicate something else? Yeah. And I think leaders have to be equipped to have those conversations. And those are not easy conversations to have.
They're not.
And you have to have a certain skill set to have those conversations that principals are responsible for coaching them on.
Yeah.
And then principals are responsible to advocate for the development. They need to be able to have those conversations. Yeah. But it needs to happen.
It needs to happen.
Period.
No, it
has to happen.
It needs to happen. So on that note, our call to action tonight is to name the thing. Call it out. Coworkers, parents, friends, strangers, when you hear racially coded language, pause, name what's happening, be respectful about it, speak candidly, but that is going to be the thing that pushes all of our thinking forward so that we can have a better interaction with each other, but most importantly, so that we can disrupt the ways in which anti-Black rhetoric shows up in our language. And even more so, we want to continue to honor, the cultural knowledge and all of the ways of being that come from Black and brown culture. We know that American culture is Black culture. And so we have to do the thing of naming it, calling it out, and disrupting. And
it is important that you leave this episode thinking about in every interaction, am I perpetuating or am I disrupting? Because those are the only avenues.
Only avenues. Before I get to the closing, this was great. This was amazing. As we close today's episode, we invite you to reflect on how language shapes perception, reality, and the real experiences and interactions we have every day. What narratives are we amplifying? What identities are we constructing when we amplify those narratives? And who benefits from the stories when we repeat them? If this conversation resonated with you, please share your thoughts with a colleague, use it in a staff meeting, bring it to a graduate seminar. If you would like to join this conversation, please go to educationincontext.org. Thank you.